In this video, I'm going to give reasons why it's very important for you to use plaster gauge in building. So plaster gauge has so many advantages over just doing plaster without using it. There are a lot of houses that they did not use plaster gauge in their plastering. You will see that the disadvantage of not having plaster gauge is going to be all over the building. It's very clear to be able to see a lot of errors on it, but with plaster gauge those errors will not be seen on it. There will be no disadvantage on it because plaster gauge was used in the plastering. So I'm going to explain in detail and give you insights and examples of the advantage of using plaster gauge and the disadvantage of not using plaster gauge in your plastering. There was a site that I went to for supervision of plastering. It was not only plastering supervision, so we were involved in the building construction up to the plastering level. Then the owner was the one that brought the workers for the building construction. My own duty was just to supervise them and all that. So during the plastering stage, they at a point they did not call me and they started doing the plastering. So when they were doing the plastering, they started from the front, so they were doing the plastering, and later on the owner called me and told me to come and kind of see the plastering that they are doing. So he didn't want to pay for supervision of plastering. So I went there. On getting there, I saw that they were just doing the plastering without making use of plaster gauge, and the whole thing was looking very bad. The external edge, although they were not done with the side of the building, but I can see that the edge of the external edge was not straight. It was not straight at all. Some place, let's say this is a straight line, and if you are going, there will be a bent line, straight line, bent line. Some parts will be out, some parts will be inside the external edge. It was not straight at all, and if they continue that way, it's going to be a problem. The external edge of the building is going to be very, very bad. It's not going to be straight, and it will be very obvious for anybody to see that the plaster is not done rightly. Then another thing that I also observed in their plastering was that when I make use of my range and I checked, so when I checked and I saw that the plaster was not okay. Some part was okay while some part was not okay. So some part needed some filling and all that. So I just told them that they should hold on, they should stop working for that day, and let's begin the plastering tomorrow. That will be around to direct them on how to work with the plaster gauge. So the workers that were there were very angry, they were furious, and they said, why will I stop them from working, that they are doing the right thing. You can see that this external edge is very straight, so that's how it's supposed to be. The external edge of the building is supposed to be straight. If it's not straight, it means that the plaster was not done correctly. The workers were arguing that that's not the first time that they are doing their handling plastering, that's the right way to do black plastering. There is no need for plaster gauge. So the owner was there. I spoke with the owner. Then the owner said that they should follow my instruction. So we started, since they have already done the front of the plaster of the front of the building. So we started with we started working on the side of the building. So when we were working on the side, I taught them how to use a plaster gauge, so they were able to work with it. And then as they were working on the plaster, using the plaster gauge method for the plastering, so they started to see the difference. The edge of the building was very, very straight, and they were happy, and they told me that this method is very good. They told me that they start making use of plaster gauge in many of their other sites, although the method is slower compared to just doing your plastering without plaster gauge. So the side of the building, the plaster gauge are using doing the side of building, since we use plaster gauge in the side of the building, so it's the side of the building that corrected the front of the building, the edge and all that. So we were able to get a perfect job, and plaster gauge was the right way to do plaster. Then the external edge, all the external edges were perfectly straight. The owner said he do not want artwork for his building, so he wants everything to be plain. So with the plaster gauge it was better. There was other buildings that I saw around the site. They did not make use of plaster gauge. It was very obvious. There were a lot of bent external edges around the external edges of of those buildings. And another thing I observed, that they did artwork on some of the buildings. So it was the same way that they did the plastering. That was the same way the person that did the artwork also followed through as well. So both the external edge of the building and the artwork was also bent. So that's why it's very important for you to have an external edge that is straight. Then when the artwork now comes in, it becomes straight as well. That's why plaster gauge is very, very important and essential in plastering. Because plaster gauge was used in plastering, both the external edge was straight, the windows were straight, then the doors were also straight. So also I had to also check the surface of the, apart from the external edge. So I had to make use of range and place range on the surface of the plaster, and there was no space, there was no gap between, and there was no gap underneath the range. So it showed that it was properly plastered. So plaster gauge is the way to go when you are handling your plastering. Plaster gauge should be used in every side, every part of the building that has to do with plastering. Even if it's the bottom of the decking, the gauge should be used. Even if it's is at the edge of building that is not that that's the distance is short, plaster gauge should also be used. So plaster gauge should be using everything that has to do with plaster, so that, let's say in two side, after using plaster gauge on one side, the other side use plaster gauge on the other side, then at the end of the day, the gauge will now tell you, when you are doing your plastering, the gauge will tell you where you are to fill, where you are to, you understand. So the gauge will tell you how the meeting point of the two plaster gauge will not tell you the exact line of the external edge. So that's why you have an external edge that is very straight, because plaster gauge was used in one side and plaster gauge was used in the other
For the
side.
gauge
So
of
use
the
plaster
plaster, you
gauge
have to
for
make use
everything that has
of
to do with
one
plastering.
bricklayer for that. Depend on the area they are going to work on.
So you can also make use of two bricklayers. At least all the bricklayers should have knowledge of how to do it. But if all of them does not know it, at least one person or one or two can kind of get the gauge first. Then after getting the gauge, then the person can assist in continuing assisting the plastering. So you don't need to, if all the bricklayers can be able to work on the gauge, then they can be working on the gauge. Then after getting the gauge, then plastering begins. Or you can also do it another way. One person can be working on the gauge, then other persons will be following up with the gauge, while the person that is getting the gauge will be continuing to get the gauge on based on the area they are going to work on. Then when the person is done working with getting the gauge, then the person can join them in the plastering.
If you have not subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe for more content. Click the notification bell below so that you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. So if you want me to create a content on how to check for plaster accuracy, if the plaster is correct, it's properly done, comment down below so that I'll make a video on that.